Hi there, this is Martin Shervington, and I'm joined here today by David Amaland. And myself and David are going to be reviewing the first three modules of a course on the plusyourbusiness.com website, which is on Google Semantic Search, which is based on the 12 chapters of David's absolutely brilliant book called Google Semantic Search. There we go. So the plan, really, if you haven't seen the videos yet, you're going to want to watch the videos. And say it's on plusyourbusiness.com. It's totally free, so just log in and access that. And the aim of this session is, in part, to answer some questions from people within the Plus Your Business and the broader Google Plus community, but also to explore a little further and to apply some of the concepts. My role is going to be to begin with a blank slate in my mind and to try and give you the best experience of building up what you can do with Google Semantic Search. So we've got the content on the site which explain in more detail what it's all about, but we'll do a quick recap. But the aim then is about application and understanding a little bit more. So that's the plan, and welcome, David.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here.
Great to be here with you again. So this has been a lot of fun. We've been working tremendously in the background in order to get this together. But if you hadn't done the book, I don't know where this would have all come from. So thank you.
Thank you.
So let's kick off with what's on the first module. What is Google Semantic Search? If you just sum it up in a minute or two.
Okay. Easiest answer, really. It's all about turning the traditional uncertainty which we had in search when we tried to find things, where we sort of tried to second guess what we need. We used to use keywords. People creating the content also used to use keywords, and they were trying to match up. And there's two people working in the dark, for instance, as an example, trying to match up, and hopefully they would meet up, and the person with the web page would have succeeded in getting our attention, and we would have found the right page. And there's an element of uncertainty to that. And as the web got bigger and bigger, that element of uncertainty grew and grew, and the dissatisfaction with search also became more evident. Semantic search is actually designed to address this, and the ultimate aim is that if you have a web page which answers a specific problem, that web page is the best possible page to answer it, and that should be rewarded by capturing the person's attention when they need it. So it's taking the uncertainty out of search, which I think is amazing. We're not there yet, but that's where it's going. So this is what the whole sort of 12 modules are about, and what we're trying to do through this educational approach we're taking here.
Okay, so what does this practically mean for me as a content creator with a website, for instance? So let's get into how I can apply this.
Okay, if we look at the two examples of how you used to approach this, you used to have to do your keyword research because you were trying to find out what people were trying to look for when they discovered your website. And then you would try to create content around those specific keywords because those were the triggers which would help your content actually appear and surface and rank on Google's first page. And you don't need to do that anymore. What you need to do is you need to ask yourself, what is it I'm actually selling, promoting, pushing out there in terms of information? And the moment you understand that, then you need to ask yourself, okay, what does it answer? What does my product actually do? What is the problem it solves? What does my information actually help people do? And you create content which basically provides the answers, the real answers, valuable answers to those questions. And that's what you need to focus on. You need to forget about search per se and actually focus on delivering value to the end user. And that's the approach you need to take.
Okay, so now I'm going to come up because the keywords thing is fascinating. So I actually still use keywords. Oh my God! What I do.
We all do. I mean, we're conditioned still.
But what I do is then look at. Because I've used Google AdWords for the last, I don't know, 11, 12 years, or whenever it launched in the UK. I will go and I use the Google keyword tool, which is now integrated within Google AdWords. It's slightly different, but I will have a look at, is there a market? Are there people searching for whatever it is that I could be looking at providing the solution for, the best value content? So I use both approaches. Because I haven't spoken to you, I know that it's got to be about answering those queries and having that mentality. But I still use keywords. But it's not that I'm looking to optimize, because I don't do that. I mean, you know my approach with it. I just write naturally and just hope it's all right. I hope there's not too many errors that Ronnie Pincer very kindly points out from it. But and typos, let's say. So what I do is take your very much the new approach and blend it with the old approach. I mean, what do you think about that? Because I think that's where a lot of people will be starting from.
Well, first of all, I think what you said is perfectly understandable. We've been conditioned until now to actually think in keywords and act as if keywords are the main vehicles. Getting out of that mentality is incredibly difficult. And I know that for myself, I have to consciously not type in search using keywords. Now, we must really focus on a fact here. Google has transitioned into the semantic web and semantic search, but the index is still imperfect and it's still scaling. And the gaps in that are actually provided by keywords. Also, we must say that if you're writing specific content, inevitably you're going to use some keywords which are related to the content you're actually creating. The difference in the approach is that in the past we used to create content around specific keywords, and now they sort of occur more naturally. So to get back to your question, it is perhaps prudent to do your research, your market research, using any kind of keyword research to see what people are still searching for. But when you create your content, you should focus primarily on answering the question and creating value in what you create, because this is a long-term strategy. And then within that, you're sort of aware that certain specific keywords are going to occur, and if they do, that's a good thing. So it sort of focuses the mind.
I feel that I'm doing it okay.
Yes, absolutely.
But I think because so many people are looking at keywords, and we say keywords are dead, it's like, well, actually, keywords still indicate there's a market. Potentially, yes. Because you can advertise that market using AdWords, and I agree totally with the content creation. I'm pretty fortunate because I haven't approached. When I started originally doing web stuff in the early 2000s, well, late 90s, the mentality around SEO was so different, and I went to Google AdWords very quickly, even though I did probably a year of SEO type work, and I know that so many people will still be in that mentality, as you say. But I think that there's something around the research, which is when we can get more tools, for instance, on who's looking on Google Plus for certain content, what questions they're typing, and so on. Suddenly that gives us a richer landscape to really understand what this semantic web's about. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how things are changing with mobile and voice.
Okay, I mean, probably the easiest example to bring up here is the very recent addition of actually using voice search on desktop. And the moment we do that, we start talking to a computer in a totally different way than if we did keywords. And we get different results. So the moment we use natural language, the semantic index kicks in, and we get a lot more targeted and more precise content. It's a gradual transition. We're all going to mentally change in this. Until that happens, I think the approach which you've taken is probably the best one, because it blends both. I suspect a lot of people actually are taking that approach. So certainly, I know that many of the people I see in the corporate world are still in this sort of gray zone, and the results which we see in search are also very similar. Having said this, I mean, if you want to think about how do we go about researching for queries as opposed to keywords, well, Google has given us the real-time insights tool, which essentially allows us to see what kind of queries people are looking for, what kind of subjects people are looking for, and also Google Trends, which is the other one. And admittedly, both of these are a lot harder work than looking at just keywords, but I think this is the break. In the past, up to the point that semantic web came in, every tool we had at our disposal appeared to be very easy. There's always push button for reports, push button for clicks. We had so many visitors coming in, and it was fairly easy to infer things from this. But the inferences we made were always very imprecise, although we felt, because they were based on data, that they were very accurate. Going now into the harder work which has to happen, where we research queries, we research trends, we research search volumes, it is harder to synthesize and harder to look for, but the results are going to be a lot better. And I think it's going to make us better marketers. It's going to enable us to target our audience better, and it's going to be satisfying. It's going to increase the satisfaction from the end user point of view all over the web, basically.
Okay, let's now move on to the second module in the second chapter in the book. So thank you for an introduction to Google Semantic Search. The second one is, what is the knowledge graph? And I know we've got a question on this as well, but if you'd like to give a 1 to 2 minute version.
Yes, definitely, yeah. I mean, if we think a knowledge graph essentially is all the different concepts and pieces of data which go around a particular concept, essentially give it the identity. And a very classic example I usually bring up is the word tree. You know, the moment you say the word tree in your head, you have all these things about tree. It's made of wood. You know, wood is lined, wood burns. You can have buildings made out of it. You know, you can use it as a material which floats in the sea. You know, all these things which you know about it. Now, the things which you know about wood, which essentially define what a tree is, are your knowledge graph, your own personal knowledge graph, which means a tree is the entity. So the knowledge graph defines the entity essentially, and entity is what comes up in semantic search. And to understand the power of the knowledge graph, you know, if you think of if you change languages and go from English where you say tree to French where you say arbre, it's still a tree. The moment you understand the word arbre is tree, then everything which you know in English about a tree and what it is gets remapped onto the word arbre, even though you cannot express the same fluency in French that you would in English. And that's what the knowledge graph is essentially. It's pieces of data where the relations between the pieces of data define a specific object, which in this case, in my example, was a tree.
Okay. Extending on that then, things, not strings.
Yes.
What does this mean?
Well, it means essentially, yes.
I mean, question now.
Well, it means essentially that Google now is actually beginning to understand objects the same way we would. So it looks at all the defining characteristics, like we said, what is a tree? It's made of wood, wood floats, wood burns, you know, we use wood as a building material. It's a tree is also good for it has qualities, it's good for the environment, etc., etc. Well, Google pieces all those things together in order to understand that a tree is not a piece of code, it's a concept, which means all those things and is related to all those things, the same way we do. So when you ask for a tree in search, for instance, Google understands exactly what you're asking for. And if it understands that, then it begins to understand the intent behind it, which is the real important thing. Because sometimes we're very imprecise at expressing ourselves in terms of the language we use, because language is imprecise. But the intentions behind that language are very precise. And that's where the real magic happens.
Okay, so now we move towards content. So keep on with the same thing. So how, as a marketer or as a business, should we approach producing content then if we're looking to surface in the new semantic web?
Okay. In the past, we used to use content as a sort of a blind tool. We used to write for search. And what did we do? I mean, here the major infractions, what I'm going to name now. We used to focus on keywords in the URL. We used to focus on keywords in the headings and the titles we used to put in. We had to go for keyword density. We knew we had to create content which is about 400 words, and then we had to socialize it. What does that mean? We used to put it out on Twitter or Facebook, whatever other social network we had, as a link dump. And then if we wanted to push it a little bit more, we used to get some links pointing to that page, and we could even buy them, okay, although this was frowned upon. Now, if we did all those things, that's it. We had our job done. We optimized the page. It was going to rank in search, and people would inevitably see it in relation to the content of that page. And now this doesn't work anymore. All those things, although Google still looks at them, it also looks to see exactly the value of the page by understanding the content a lot more precisely instead of looking at all these technicalities. And also, when we say socialize it, we don't mean just link dump it in social networks so Google can see it, that it's there and pick up the social signal. You actually have to get engagement. So really, the switch is that you're writing first for people and second for search engines, whereas in the past you used to write first for search, and people were, a very far second. And that's a significant change because people can't be fooled. Search engines can because, they use blind mathematical logic. People don't. They actually need to see value. They need to trust you as a source of information or as a person to buy something from, and that is an entirely different ball game.
So this is where we can come on to Google Plus.
Yes.
Because Google Plus and the community and the communities to which people belong, and essentially, as a writer, as an author of content, you write for your community.
Yes.
You write for the people who are interested, but you have to build your network to get to that point. But this is probably why I love it so much, because suddenly you've got an audience that likes what you do, that engages with it, and if you put the effort in, then that often leads to it surfacing. That was a mixed word. Surfacing in search, because the engagement seems to trigger that this is relevant content, not just on personalized search results for people, but also as general results, that this is good, relevant content for people to look at.
Yes.
So Google Plus has changed the game then, and it's almost, I said about YouTube, when the comments changed, it was like the parents at Google had turned up and turned the lights on. Is that almost what's happened with search as well? Is that
yes, absolutely.
I mean, the party's kind of ended for the old way. There we go.
That's a good analogy. Well, you said before, from strings to things, and the second half of that sentence is from websites to people. And in the past, we used to look at a website, and it was very technically driven because the content had been written for search. The website was very slick because that's what actually gave us a certain sense of credibility on the web, and so on and so on. And now we've gone to people. You can have the best website in the world. If its content doesn't resonate with people, if they don't reshare it, they don't engage with it, they don't talk about it, they don't make a kind of judgment which allows it to surface in other networks because they pass it around, then that website is dead in the water. It doesn't matter anymore. And again, this is conceptually, it's a massive change. It's a huge rift in terms of how business operates, which is why we see it being such a challenge. For individuals, certainly, but also for massive businesses, because they're not used to operating this way. So G+, in this case, being Google's identity network, and these are Google's own words about it, essentially creates a certain sense of trust, because people talking to people knowing what people do, is immediately a totally different kind of trust matrix that applies there. The dynamics and how people decide who to trust take a lot longer to develop. They create a lot more interaction and engagement, but also they create a greater impact. So for instance, a business, let's assume that a business has been active on Google Plus at a personal level for 2 years. That business now has traction and an audience which trusts it. It helps it surface its content, it helps it surface in search, it helps the business develop and grow by word of mouth and recommendation. And this business has actually tapped into a rich source which other businesses don't even know about. So Google Plus is key at the moment, and certainly in the semantic web, it's the only available shortcut, which is not so short really, but the only available advantage you can gain.
Okay, which leads us on. Now we've moved towards this a bit, but I know we've got things like personalization. We've touched on voice and mobile already. Chapter 3 and Module 3 of the Google Semantic Search course. What's new in SEO? Would you like to go into some of those other areas as well? And we can expand
Yes, certainly. I mean, there are several things which are new, and let's cover some of them. One of the things is that search itself has fragmented in all these different properties. It used to be just the one first page of Google, which gave us a kind of leaderboard, which gave us the leaderboard mentality, whether it was ego stroking that you had to be on the first page, regardless if it was giving you real return for your investment or not, or if it was, you're chasing keywords, which basically satisfied the checkbox marketing mentality of the past. Now, search is fragmenting. It's on mobile, it's on different devices, it's become personalized. We have YouTube, we have Google Now, and all these, and this is only the beginning. We're still going to get Google Glass, which is in the future, in the very near future. And we haven't even got to the point where we have screenless computers, which talk back to us to spoken questions, which changes the game entirely. So because search is fragmented in that way, SEO, as it was done, no longer washes. It's no longer this sort of maniacal focus on links and keywords, which used to be the two pillars of SEO. So now we now have to think of it in a more holistic way. And if you are working in the SEO industry and you're watching this, then basically you should know already from your own clients and how they relate to you that you become holistically involved in their business. You become an invaluable asset to them, which helps them understand how to best promote themselves in a really valuable and long-term way on the web. And if you haven't been doing that, obviously you won't be in business for very long, which is, it's one of these things.
Sure, I know what's going to happen is that a lot of people who used to phone up companies, and I had this all the time, is that people would phone up and say, okay, for $1,000 a month, we can get you on the first page of Google. And that was the sales pitch. It might take 3 months, 6 months, whatever it might be, but that's the sales pitch. They're going to feel it's not fair. This just isn't fair.
Yes.
Years. Don't take it away. What are you doing, Google?
I know. And Google is evil doing that, I know. But the thing is, at the end of the day, let's forget business for a minute and let's realize, what is search? Search is the window we have in managing the information on the web. If search doesn't work, or if search gets taken away, the web falls apart. It becomes useless. Basically, you can't find anything unless you know the exact URL to go to. So it doesn't help anybody. So really, in order to move forward, search has to work. And search has to work not for the business who does search engine optimization. That's incidental. It has to work for the end user. And the only way it can do it is if it gives you the perfect piece of information or the perfect answer the moment you want it. Because if it doesn't do that, then it's failing you. Within that matrix, an SEO company or an SEO professional has to find a way to become valuable to a business. And if they can't do that, well, they shouldn't be there.
So it's going to change. It's inevitable. It's going to change. It's almost, this is what it's been trying to be for a while. It's just Google have needed to bring Google Plus in so that they can attribute the individual, the profile, to a piece of content or to a website using the relevant publisher markup. That's really that's the pipe work that's gone underneath into the content.
Yes, it's also an element of fact checking, if you like. Basically, the trickiest bit about semantic search is veracity. It's basically understanding the truthfulness behind the information that's being passed around. Because we can try and game it. We can get together a couple of thousand of our buddies and we can push something and reshare it. That doesn't mean that it's actually the right thing should surface in terms of an answer just because we are trying to game it. So this veracity mechanism is a bugbear. It's really difficult to solve. And Google is using a variety of techniques. One of them is going to be mechanical, obviously, and machine logic is going to come into this. But it is using the social signal on the basis that you may be able to fool some people, but fooling all of them is very difficult.
Let me dive into, there's a few things there.
Okay.
So the first one is, let's look at people that are doing that. So let's say you've got a company, and you've got a company of 300 people, and they've all got profiles on Google+, and they all have an internal memo, please share this content now. What signal does that send to Google? Well,
first of all, Google will see that signal. Conceivably, this content may actually indeed rise in search. It may not rise for very long, of course, because Google also will look at the profiles, it will look at their signature, we'll see how they are linked and to whom are they linked to, what have they done before, if it's out of character, if it is within their character, if it's within their interests. So basically the assessment which is being carried out is very nuanced. And one of two things will happen. First of all, if it sees that it's actually sustained and intentional gaming, it may drop out of search completely because it will discount it. If it sees that it is, the content perhaps is valuable, but this is sustained gaming behavior from these profiles, those profiles will lose the ability to surface any content in future. So basically, this is almost like a trust rank. How do we gain reputation in the real world? You have to work really hard to get it, and then you can do something really silly just once, and you're going to lose it, and you have to work really hard to come back from that. It's the same thing online. So if you think how Google is basically working to keep us honest, it is making us work very hard to gain our credibility and authority, and we can lose it very quickly. So we can become ineffectual, and years of work can be lost by one or two very stupid instances of online behavior.
Well, let's bring in a couple of things then. So one is, somebody coming along and wanting to pay you to share their content. Will Google know?
Well, suppose you don't disclose that. I mean, Google said, you can promote things if you want, provided you have full disclosure. Suppose you don't. So essentially what you're doing there is you're using your profile to present something under the auspices of being authentic and spontaneous when it is not. And there's subterfuge there, and basically we can say that you're not being real and perhaps a kind of lie. Google would be able to find out, because if you engage in a kind of behavior, conceivably, it's not usually within the signature of your profile. If it is, maybe you'll be able to hide it and get away with it perhaps once, but as you engage sustainably in this behavior for a long period of time, it begins to accumulate.
Can I just dive in? I want to go for the dumb question. I think this is a really interesting way for people to understand the depth of what's going on, really. When you say not within the signature of a profile, of your profile, what does that mean?
Well, if we to sort of quantify this, suppose, forget online, and suppose, I know you personally because you're my next door neighbor, and we actually have quite some contact over, a period of years. Over that time, I form a pretty good idea of who you are, what you do, what is acceptable behavior from me to you, and so on. So if you do something which, is out of character, I can say, hey, that's out of character. This is not the Martin I know. And how do I say that? How can I possibly say that? Because in my mind, all the little bits which I know about you accumulate into a holistic picture of who you are. And that's exactly what's happening online with the added layer that Google doesn't forget. You can see everything you ever done in an instant. And you can see also the new things which you do, engage them against other things. And also you can look at other profiles similar to yours. People perhaps engage in the same sort of profession or in the same kind of environment, and how they behave. So it creates a kind of baseline marker. So if you do something which basically deviates from that, this creates an unnatural signature, which begins to raise red flags. So bottom line is you can't hide online. You can't do it anymore. I mean, you could offline, you could do it in a very, very specific instances, and it took a lot of effort. We used to think that online it's easier because it used to be anonymity, nobody really saw what we could do, and everything was fragmented. In a holistic web where semantically everything is connected, well, you really can't hide. It's a very transparent world. So either you remain honest and consistent to who you are, or you're going to end up suffering because you failed to do that.
And essentially, you end up with a personal algorithm.
Yes, you do. And I mean, Google is essentially weighing up who you are and what you do, how important you are, what kind of credibility and influence you have. And for instance, you could say, I mean, if you're involved, let's say you're involved in promoting cars, for instance, and a new car comes in the market, and you say to your followers, this car is no good, and you explain why it's no good. Google sees, and actually, because this is what you do normally, your opinion carries weight. But if you're a bird watcher, and usually you watch birds, and you've never really talked about a car before, and you say something about a car, and you've got 10 million people following you, well, that's an outlier in terms of a response, because those 10 million people follow you for your opinion in birds, but not in cars. So Google is going to discount that. And again, this is the way we would operate offline. If you go to a baker, you perhaps be able to take advice about making the perfect home-baked loaf from the baker. But if he told you something about how to fine-tune your expensive Porsche, you might take that with a pinch of salt.
Okay, so it's the transparency and the consistency. I mean, people on the event, thanks for your comments, and they're saying it's the trustworthiness, the authenticity, and we're going to come on to that in later modules, so I won't go too much further into that now. Okay. But that's in essence what's new in SEO, is that, as Cynthia says on the thread, the cheese has moved.
Yes, absolutely, it has, and that's why everybody's worried about it. But basically, you need to find out where it is now, and you need to chase it and understand it. So yes, I mean that's great. Great comment.
So I'm going to pick up on some questions. The first one, John Dunn.
Okay.
Structured data. Now, I'm going to hit you with almost bullet point questions here.
Okay.
Is it A, Google scraping your data and answering queries without the need to leave SERPs, which is search engine result pages? No, that's A. Do you want to say yes on that? B, It's almost like a game show. We can have
it is a little bit, yes.
Pick behind one of the box, whichever one thing.
Yeah. Right. Do I get a prize for that?
It's a long question, folks. I'm going to read it. B, Google reducing CPU to crawl the existing web. C, Google driving webmaster tools for better traffic. D, all, some, or none of all, some, or none of the above. Okay, none. That made sense. That was a fine sentence. Well done, John. It's me reading it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, Google doesn't need to reduce CPU. Okay. It's, if anything, it's scaling up its data centers, and it's found new ways of actually squeezing more and more power out of its chips. So this is not what semantic search is about, or structured data indeed. Now, for those people who are watching and are not 100% sure about structured data is essentially pulling the information from the web in specific ways, which allows it to travel across the web without changing. And one example is, if we look at postcodes, for instance, UK postcodes and postcodes in the US are different. In the US, they're called zip codes, and the format is different. In the UK, they're 6 characters, which have letters and numbers, and the format is different. And formerly, if you had an address which had a UK postcode and you took that to a website which is in the US, it wouldn't make any sense. The database, they wouldn't be able to understand it, and it would just reject it. In the semantic web, a translation takes place. So essentially, if you're going from a UK to a US address or vice versa, the database begins to understand what that a zip code and a postcode are the same thing, and basically the format is different, but they still signify the same thing, and so on, and it begins to make sense. So Google does this mechanically. It pulls stuff out of the web, out of unstructured data, which is the websites and web pages most of us have, and begins to put it in a structured format. But also those who can play around with a little bit of coding and create structured data themselves, there's a schema.org which allows you to specify specific things. Do you need to have that? The answer is no. If you can do it, great. If you can't, no. If you implement it, you're helping Google, certainly, but it's not a ranking factor. And Google, to a certain extent, distrusts user-generated data because sometimes there's a temptation there to game the system a little bit and making it a little bit more clever than it is. So, use it if you can. Don't use it if you can't. It won't really make a big difference. And in the long, in the longer plan, Google is going to try and move beyond the need to have user-generated structured data. So I think I've answered the questions. I'm not 100% sure now because there were
I'm not sure which box it was, but I think you won.
Okay. Okay. Is that the holiday to Barbados?
Yeah. Well done. There you go. You can put the link in the chat. Just picking up a couple of questions from the thread. John Chef says, are you saying, David, you should stay in one niche? This is coming back to the point earlier about the authenticity and the trust of the content.
Yes. Okay. This is a recurring question. It comes up again and again. I think it's misinterpreting consistency with sort of a very tunnel vision in what we do. No, we shouldn't stay in one niche. I mean, obviously, if you're professionally working online, you're predominantly talking about your work. If you only talk about your work, however, and you're talking to people, you're not giving them a lot of handle to find out who you are, which means you're making it harder for them to trust you. It doesn't mean they won't trust you. They probably will if you keep delivering value and content which is valuable, but you're making it harder for yourself. So be yourself online. Be as if you want. If it's in your character to be a little bit flippant at times and put jokes out there, by all means do, because it allows people to understand who you are. Don't worry, and there's a fear here that if you do that, oh, am I watering down my authority? Well, no, you're not, because remember, Google doesn't actually forget. It's there. It sees everything you do every second you're online forever. So unless you post very little about your work and a lot of other things, then no, you're not watering down your authority.
Okay. Thank you. Next one. We've got a few more that are coming on the thread, actually.
Good.
Ronnie, a chap called Ronnie Bincer, I've heard of him. How is
vaguely familiar?
Yeah. How is relevancy now related to what we are given authority trust for? You ended on a preposition there. I'm not going to pick you up on your language, Ronnie, even though today you have picked me up on, a few times on my on my typos. But yeah, so how does that work?
Okay, well, essentially, as we build up our authority, the content which we put out there is assessed and weighed a little bit differently because of the authority of our profiles. This allows Google to make certain judgments about that content, which should, when it comes to search and that content surfacing in search, it should appear in a more accurate way. So essentially, our interaction is helping relevant content link up or appear to queries. And when I say our interaction, I mean this in the broadest sense possible. And in terms of what we do individually, well, our own personal networks help increase the relevancy of how we appear and connect with other people. And when I say personal networks, you can connect potentially with 15,000 people or 1 million people, but really you're only going to be very relevant to a small percentage of those people because you're going to have engagement with them.
Absolutely, and this is where it comes into tribe.
Yes, I mean, I tend to sort of, I think tribe is a little bit old word, but certainly, I mean, it helps focus the mind. But I tend to think of audience, which is a better way of describing it.
I'm too Seth Godin with that, you see, because
yes,
and I think it is, and I think you're right. It's something which has probably got us to where we've got to, because it's now community. It's the people who are around you, and it's probably, in my view, somewhere between 50 to 150. Are the ones that you're closest to a lot of the time, and then there's a periphery of maybe another 150. And I know it's Dunbar's number. It is,
yes, it's a Dunbar number. Yeah.
But it seems to be holding up. It really does. And if you write for them and you produce content that you're just doing your best to try and give them information that they relate to, that seems to be getting the engagement much more than trying to get 1,000, 2,000 people to interact. Because, and this is where Google Plus is brilliant, it's not just those 50, 100, 150. It's them plus their networks.
Of course, yeah, it amplifies.
Because they're the ones that are taking that in, but you may not have a direct relationship with those people. You've got a relationship with one person that then goes off to the edge of the village and go, you never guess what, guys, this is awesome, or look at this point of view, or whatever it might be.
Yes, I think that's brilliant. I think I'm very glad you brought this example up because there's a question there by Jim Shankel, I think, which says, okay, how do you use, for instance, a video like this one to promote your content or your brand if you are a brand on the web? And it's exactly what you said. Essentially, you're not targeting the entire web. You're not targeting 10 million people, 20 million people. You're targeting a very narrow network by creating content which resonates with them, but that content is going to be amplified. That people, if it's real content which has real value, the people who are going to engage with it are also going to have valuable profiles themselves in terms of the weight and authority they carry, so their word carries, which means that they will help become amplification points for what you do. So essentially, you are creating an automatic amplification machine of your message and your signal by focusing in a very narrow sort of a sector on quality and creating depth, which brings us back pretty much to the initial question about content creation and what is different now in terms of search and SEO. In the beginning, it used to be, it was all ticking boxes and writing for the millions and millions of people who looked for a particular keyword. And you said, 1 million people look for this keyword, I'm going to write for them. And now you don't. Now you write for the 10, 50, 100, 150 maximum, which you said, which need to know the answer to this question, but it's going to be such valuable content that will answer so precisely that then they will be enthusiastic and they'll go away and they'll share with a network, and then that'll cascade through that network to their own contacts, and then it creates the kind of amplification effect.
And that ties in. Greg Cooper has asked a question about other networks, and he says if he posts to the language, I'll read it out and then I'll change it up.
Okay.
Greg says, if I post in a public group on Google+, you might be referring to a community, will it be ranked, for want of a better word, than a post in an open LinkedIn group? So let's answer this without answering your question first, Greg. Let's talk about the difference between posting on Google+ to public, and we'll come on to a community in a second, which may or may not be slightly different, and then we'll look at, let's say, LinkedIn. How is it different? Why is it different? I'll let you answer. Go on.
Okay. Now, theoretically, it shouldn't be, and eventually it won't be. Okay. Eventually, Google will be able to mine signals across the web with such precision, they will be able to see where content surfaces and make specific judgments. But even then, let's not forget that Google Plus is entirely transparent to Google, which means the signal here is very clear, it's very fast, and it's very deep. And anything which is outside that, Google has to overcome specific obstacles, some of them intentional and some of them not so. So as things stand right now, if you post something in LinkedIn, yes, you are creating a social signal, but the strength of that social signal in terms of how Google indexes it is a little bit under question mark. And if you do the same thing within Google Plus, then you're creating a very clear signal which Google can actually assess and examine and weigh and then make an inference from, which is unequivocal.
So Google can surface the content easier because it's got access to who did the authorship and who's been interacting with it, etc. So that's where we're at.
Yes.
So let's flick it onto the next bit of Greg's question, which probably was Greg's question, about communities and posting within communities. Now this is starting to get a slight tactical thing, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, communities allow a lot of granularity to happen, which means that, suppose for instance, you're actually trying to build up your authority in a specific subject, and you have two choices here. You can post to the public and hope somebody will actually engage and interact with you, which means you have to hope they see it first, or you can post within a specific community which is for that kind of subject. Now, if you're posting in that community for that subject, obviously you are targeting a very specific audience and you are highlighting yourself as either being engaged or interested in the kind of subject or being an authority in it in terms of sharing information and answering questions around it. So if you are creating the kind of authority, arguably you should be active in communities on a specific subject which relates to your authority, or you should have a community of your own which should have enough engagement and interaction to actually help you develop the kind of impact on your profile. Throwing it out in the public stream, hoping that people will see it, interact and engage with it, is okay-ish, but it's a long-term plan which has certain uncertainties built into it, because people may see it, they may not, they may be busy, they may be following a lot of people, they may totally miss it. So it creates a different kind of dynamic. So to get back to this, which is the best thing? Well, for finding our contacts and widening your network, the public stream, certainly you should be seeding it with quality content, because that's how you widen your circle of contacts. But certainly you should be active in specific communities which address very specific things and where the conversation there is very deep indeed. And I think that helps promote your authority.
Okay, I have a few things to add around the etiquette of promoting into communities and those sorts of things, which I probably can leave for another time. But one of the things to add as well is, I would say for people, particularly if they're starting out, not to neglect, Benji, always on cue, not to neglect building your network and trying to rely on communities just to amplify the content, because a lot of people would rather relate to you outside of a community and get to know you on a broader basis than just you be using the community to try and get shares, because I've seen it backfire with people. But that's getting into the nitty-gritty of how to use Google Plus appropriately. So hopefully that's good for Greg. Now, there's a lot of other questions, but what I'd like to do, Jim Shankle asked one, and I'd like to take two different scenarios in order to ask Jim's question, which is probably too long to read out. But the essence is, how do you use this as a company? Let's run through a case study. Why does it matter, and what can we do? But I want to run two things. One is a small business that's turning over $500,000, $350,000 a year, and let's say they're a shop. And they've got an online shop as well. So it's a real world and online. Scenario A. Scenario B, company that's turning over $1 billion, got 200 brands, and they're internationally based. So totally at two different ends of the scale. I know we could have this. We've covered the smaller, having a website and being a blogger and so on. So scenario A, what should people look at in relation to semantic search in particular?
Yeah, here's the thing. In the pre-semantic world, the SEO requirements for a small business of scenario A to a big business or scenario B was radically different, so much so that it required almost entirely different skill sets. In semantic web, it's not the case any longer. The challenges they face are very similar, and the approaches to solving them are also very similar. And what changes, obviously, are the circumstances in terms of budgets, perhaps manpower, and obviously scale. So what is the challenge? The challenge is to find your audience. And how are you going to do that? You're going to find it by creating your content. How are you going to create your content? Are you just going to go out there and pay somebody to create it for you? Certainly you could, but if you did that, you have to have a very clear idea how to instruct them, because that's what you'll actually be promoting yourself. You'll be promoting your identity, which means you need to know who you are. You need to actually be able to pinpoint what is your character, what makes your business unique, what is your unique selling point, what makes it necessary for the people who see your content to actually interact and engage with you. If you can't answer those questions, any kind of budget, skill in writing, skill in creating content, or manpower which you may have, is only going to backfire. So both are going to face the same thing. And now, if we come to practicality, suppose scenario A, small business, scenario B, large business with sort of a multinational kind of approach. How do they use something like let's say a video to actually reach their audience? Okay, here's the simple answer. Simple answer is you put your video out there and you socialize it, preferably starting out with G+. And you say, okay, that's very simple, I'll do that. Okay, really, is it? Let's find out how simple this is. Because the moment you have to socialize it, what do you need to do? You need to know who your audience is, because you need to know who is going to interact with it and who you're targeting. You need to know who they are, because you need to know how you're going to engage with them. You need to know what the tone of the conversation is going to be like, how you're going to introduce it. You need to know their interests. You need to be aware of the direction of their concerns and their thoughts. Otherwise, you're not going to create any kind of engagement. You also need to know where are they active in terms of times, perhaps, in time zones, in countries. You need to be aware of cultural differences. You need to be aware of the influences in their circles, because you're also trying to target them, because you want to amplify your content. So you need to know all those things in order to make a simple video like this work for you.
You've got to know how to use Google+.
Yeah, you need to.
This is it. You've got to build your network. You've got to find the influence. You've got to build relationships, and it takes time and it's effortful. And I think a lot of businesses, this is what they're running into now: is struth. Is this the way it's going to be? And I'm seeing it, and I see people come through, and they can't believe that this is so important for search as well. But it's not just search; it's people. It's people connecting with content.
Yeah.
That's how we've got to think about this now, isn't it? Really, search is just a way of accessing content.
Exactly.
It's not. It's just two things coming together. But we've got used to compartmentalizing. This is social. You do that Twitter thing. You do that LinkedIn thing. You do that Facebook thing. That's over there. But this is and when you get it, you see it, and I think the penny drops when you suddenly realize that Google Plus is Google. Therefore, the content shared publicly, even if it's not shared publicly, it still surfaces for the people with whom it's been shared when they're looking at personalized search.
Yeah.
But it's a transformational view.
It is totally. I mean, you're right about people, because if let's say the companies of that scenario, the one who actually gets it and gets it right, understands its people and does all this properly, what is the effect of the single video actually connecting and being reshared and engaged with? Well, it's going to surface in search, certainly. It's going to get indexed very quickly, definitely. It's going to start appearing in personalized search results, which essentially are almost like a customized first page of Google. So the visibility factor is going to go up. It's going to start appearing on other social networks, because some of the content is going to be tweeted about, and some of them will go and will leak into Facebook and LinkedIn. So essentially, do this properly, and it spreads across the web. And that's just one instance of how it can actually help you amplify your signal in a very powerful way, which then has a knock-on effect on your bottom line, because it increases your sales and increases your brand awareness, it brings people to your door, and so on and so on. But to do that, it's back to what you said. You need to basically understand people. You need to understand who you're connecting with. Almost like you would in offline. You wouldn't go into any kind of offline scenario and open up a briefcase and try to sell something to strangers, because the only guaranteed outcome is they will not buy from you.
So you've got to build the relationships. Now, this ties in. If we go back to the two scenarios, small to medium business and then the large, in a way, for a small business that's got 10 products, let's say, or 10 main product sets, it's fairly straightforward for them to go through the process of understanding
It's easier.
what they need to do. It's easier in a way. This is the advantage. Now, if we take it down to another scenario, a smaller one, if you're an individual and you're writing on certain subject matters, or you have products for sale on your website,
Even easier.
it's even when you get things aligned.
Yes.
When you haven't got things aligned, it's all over the place, because
Yes.
you have to come from the strategy to the tactics to the operational. But this is why the opportunity is so great, and I think this is why so many people here on Google Plus have taken advantage of this initial phase, which was what, 2 years and, well, I guess 5 months in now.
Yes.
And it's hard then for the next one up to go, oh crikey, we're gonna have to, we can't just buy the SEO results anymore and do that. But then let's now take the next level up. Because this is some of the conversations, this is what Jim was asking about, is what would this mean for a brand? You take one brand, one set of products, how would this play out on Google Plus, and how does it then play into Google Semantic Search, and how content?
Well, brands face a unique challenge because of the way they're internally set up. And they are internally set up at the moment, most of them, the ones I see at least, to reflect the way the customer market worked in the past. And how did it work? It worked in segments, and it worked in silos. So what happened in one segment of their market didn't spill over into the next. What happened in one silo of their market didn't spill over into the next. And if they had a bad customer experience, it stayed within the customer and the company, and nobody knew anything about it. It's not like that anymore. Now, the company needs to move very quickly. It needs to move almost like an individual. It needs to also project itself almost like an individual. We need to know its character. We need to know its shared values. We need to know that essentially, they're like us. If something goes wrong in the transaction, they're going to fix it. And we need to have the sense of trust in order for us to go through with it. How does that actually get transferred across the web? Well, essentially, companies need to restructure themselves internally. They need to start talking to each other because they're siloed themselves. They're compartmentalized. Marketing doesn't talk to PR, for instance. PR doesn't talk to anybody who's responsible for the SEO. Anybody who's doing our research and development and thinking of bringing new products into the market doesn't talk to marketing and doesn't talk to PR. And this kind of compartmentalization is insane in a web which moves as fast as it does now and is as transparent as it is now. So companies need to begin internally to restructure for speed and trust. And these are two elements which they've never had. It used to be that, if you needed a decision, you needed to send it up the chain. You went up the chain, somebody else had to see it until the person responsible for it, you landed on a desk. 6 months later, you got your answer. And, we're talking about tweets now, where they have to act in sort of minutes. So that kind of response time needs a different approach, and that's the internal restructuring which companies are making, and this is what's changing them. This is how the web, essentially search, something very simple, is changing the way business is happening by changing the internal structure of large companies.
For a lot of them, though, I know that they're going to be there going, oh, let's just leave it. Let's just forget. What's going to happen unless people start to realise this change and act upon it?
Well, this is what's happening with companies which I am actively involved with right now. They sense that their customer market has changed, and they sense that the traditional way of marketing to the customer market, which used to take an annual budget in ad dollars and sort of turn it through an algorithm into so much money coming in at the other end of the scale, has also changed. They spend more and more ad dollars targeting that audience, and they're not getting the returns they see. And if anything, they tend to use brand equity because their brand gets tarnished. All sorts of social media crises happen, and they get damaged by that, and their market share drops. So essentially, these things begin to eat away at the bottom line, which suggests that if they do nothing, eventually they will die.
So let me dive in on that. So essentially, in exactly the same way as word of mouth around a village, let's say, about the bread in the local bakers. So it gets good word of mouth, and people will then go to that baker's as opposed to the one in the next village, let's say, or the one on the periphery of the village. So in exactly the same way, social media allows people to connect the stories around the products that they're experiencing, because people talk about those things.
Yes.
So if a company doesn't use social media in a way which allows the conversations to be engaged with, and there are companies on Google Plus that do it very well. T-Mobile I know it's consistently does well. Simply Business happen to be disclosure, one of my clients, but they do it very well too. And they're able to get involved and have good conversations. Now, the mentality, though, and the structural things, because of the nature of the comments and the threads of the comments, it's not like Twitter. It doesn't have the same feel as that. And with Twitter, things flare very quickly. On Google+, they tend to be a bit more considered because the nature of editing content and all of these things. Now, all of this in mind, if you have a large company, why should they be looking at Google Plus as opposed to just dealing with the fires that they've got going on Twitter and Facebook? Because that's often what people are talking about with large companies. Because you get the good stuff as well, of course.
You do. And I think that's an excellent question. And the simple answer to this is that if you are only focusing on, firefighting on Twitter, for instance, or any kind of Facebook crisis which happens, the moment it's over, and nobody really remembers very much because the personal connection isn't there, especially in Twitter, where you're pretty anonymous amongst anonymous people, and you find it really difficult to sort of keep track of everybody. But the Google Plus environment certainly isn't like that. First of all, anything that happens within Google Plus is searchable. I know people complain that it's hard to find, but if you do a search, you'll actually find it. If you do it on google.com or if you do it within Google+, material keeps coming up again and again. So essentially what you solve and what you put out there remains out there. And the second thing is that it becomes a step. Everything you do is another step in relationship building. So, it never really gets lost because it's a step which takes you from A to Z. You know where you have to get to. So you need to do it a step at a time. So if you take the step, it stays there and it helps you go into the next thing.
Now, I love the fact you said A to Z. I don't even know if it's A to Z anymore, having lived in the States. I'm not sure which one to do. But
either.
It's a perfect segue into ZMOT and the zero moment of truth.
Yes.
We come on to. Because the concept, for those that don't know the zero moment of truth, the idea is that there are, the brief version is that you end up with multiple touch points in a relationship. And if you have positive touch points, so you see a review, you see somebody positively talking about the product, and then you see them engaging around something, and it kind of rolls on a good video, and you may see an advert on television, and then a friend may mention the product. All of these things become touch points, and the more personal they are, the more they matter to you. And this is really key as a thing within Google+. And companies that are able to increase the positive nature of those touch points, of those experiences for people, when the point comes for the person to make the decision to purchase, they're the ones that are in their mind. They're the obvious choice. And I think this is where, coming back to Google Plus allows people to almost understand the environment. You can actually see you can see the ecosystem by which the conversations are happening within. And we talk about Google Plus being like either like a town square or a metropolis sometimes, but the idea is that you actually know the nature of the place. You know there are comment threads. You know there are communities. You know that you have comments on your blog, for instance, and you see that there. You know its surfaces and such. So we can actually conceptually understand quite a lot of the places, and YouTube and Google Play and everywhere else that Google and Google Maps. So I can carry on. But so the idea being that the positive experiences that companies can create by being present on Google Plus, by doing Google Plus well, will actually build positive brand awareness. And when the point comes, shall I choose that product or that product, it's going to be them, because they go, do you know what, I like that company, I trust that company, and I relate to them at a more deep level than having had push marketing. Is that a reasonable parenthesis?
That is absolutely spot on, because essentially, I mean, I'm very glad you brought up the zero moment of truth, because if anything, the research which Google released on that showed that, I think something staggering, like 65% of searches, or rather 65% of purchase decisions begin with search, and that's how we start off from.
Yeah.
And what will surface on search in relation to that query is critical in the direction that the purchasing decision is going to go. And to quantify this in very stark terms, it's either, is it going to go to you as the retailer or the person providing a service, or is it going to go to your competitor? And the only way that that decision is going to be made will depend on the kind of content relating to your company or your brand that's going to be surfaced in search in relation to that search query. So, everything gets tied up into this. We talk a lot about how difficult it is sometimes to quantify the return on investment in social media in terms of engagement. And here is the answer to it. It's very stark, and especially with Google+. Certainly with Facebook, it became a little bit difficult to do. With Twitter, it became almost impossible to actually quantify sometimes. But with Google+, it hasn't, because it is so closely tied to search, and everything that happens here remains visible. It's not lost. It doesn't really fade away. And it impacts directly upon your reputation and influence as you go on to business, that it has a direct impact at the bottom line eventually, and some of it is very short term, and so some of it is a bit longer, but it is there all the time and you can't escape it.
Fantastic. David, that has been an excellent hour. Thanks to everybody for your questions. Apologies if we couldn't get to everybody, but we'll come back on the thread and see if we can pick those up. So this has been the review and the Q&A around Google Semantic Search modules 1 to 3. And what I would say is, David, would you like to leave any final thoughts, any final remarks in relation to what businesses should do?
Okay. I mean, I'm going to say a couple of things. The first thing is, by all means, you should be doing the 12 modules which we're releasing, because they're free and they're there, and they will, even if you don't get to read the book, they will certainly help guide your mind to what you should actually be doing. And at the end of the day, you're looking at all this in order to make gains in your business. And this is a freebie, so you should be taking advantage of it. The second thing is, be real. And this is the hardest thing of all, and I totally get it. I know in the past we used to say be real and never really mean it, but this time we really do. Forget about the razzmatazz of marketing, forget about all the things in the past which used to use glitz and wrapping, thinking this is what consumers want. What consumers want these days is to get in touch with you, feel that you're authentic, feel that you share their values, and they have confidence in your ability to deliver what you say you deliver. And the only way you're going to do that is if they're standing there in front of you and they can actually see you and you can see them. So you should be marketing on the web in exactly the same way now. And that's difficult, but it will actually bear fruit.
Perfect. I have no more to add. That is the most excellent place to end. Thanks everyone for viewing. Thanks David so much for all your effort with helping me put the course together. We've got the videos, we've got course manuals, we've also got quizzes that people can take, and there's a presentation for companies that can go through the process and they can be asking themselves the questions. So there's a lot of resources on plusyourbusiness.com. So if you haven't found them yet, they're all free. Go and check them out. David, I look forward to seeing you next time, and thanks a lot for watching.
Likewise. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.